Eleanor, how could you let this happen? My Aunt Claudia's voice was a shrill blade, slicing through the stunned silence of the family meeting. She was pointing at me, her face a mask of performative rage. You are the financial manager. You've ruined us. You've been hiding this from us, the entire family. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, all stared at me. The bank representative at the head of the mahogany table, a Mr. Henderson, looked at me with cold, professional pity. The flagship building. My aunt's voice cracked. Foreclosed. Auctioned in 48 hours. You did this. My cousin Marcus, her son, sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I trusted you, Ellie, he whispered, his voice thick with betrayal. My ventures. My God. Did you steal the money? Is that what this is? I should have been hysterical. I should have been in tears. I should have been stammering, defending myself. But all I felt was a cold, familiar click. The sound of a lock, which had been rattling loose for 20 years, finally snapping into place. I said nothing. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had cornered the spreadsheet girl, the detail person, and they had no idea that the details, my boring spreadsheets, they were a loaded gun, and they had just handed it to me. This meeting, this public execution, had been 5 years in the making. It began the day I gave up my life to save theirs. I had a job in Chicago, a high-paying analyst position, a life I had built for myself, far away from the toxic, crumbling legacy of the Viridian family. Then my grandfather died, and the family suddenly remembered I existed. Marcus, the golden boy, the face of the brand, had called me, his voice slick with a panic. He was trying to hide. Ellie, we need you, he'd said. The books are a mess. Grandpa. He let things slide. We just need you for 6 months. Just to get us straight. Please. You're the only one who understands the numbers. The sacrifice was my life. I gave up my apartment, my career, my future. And I came home. I came home to the dusty, neglected estate office, to 5-year-old invoices and ledgers that hadn't been balanced since my grandfather's first stroke. The deception was his promise. 6 months. That was 5 years ago. My temporary role as the family bookkeeper, the quiet, overlooked spreadsheet girl, had become my permanent prison. I wasn't an executive. I was the help. The vile contrast was our roles. I was paid a family stipend, just enough to live on, while I untangled a decade of his financial chaos. Marcus, meanwhile, was the head of development. He flew first class to research ventures. He wore $5,000 suits. He took clients to dinners that cost more than my monthly salary. He had the vision. I just had the details. My desk was in a tiny, windowless office that smelled like old paper and regret. I had just been trying to make the quarterly numbers work, to stretch the estate's dwindling funds to cover his latest venture, a disastrous attempt to rebrand the family's old textile mill into a luxury art gallery. Ellie, don't be so small-minded, he'd told me, just 3 years ago, when I'd questioned the $100,000 loan he was taking from the estate's general fund. Art is an investment. It appreciates. This will put the Viridian name back on the map. The sacrifice was every sleepless night I'd spent, every vendor I'd begged for an extension, every brutal, soul-crushing hour I'd spent moving numbers around, trying to fill the $100,000 crater he had blown in our finances. The gallery had failed in 8 months. The art was sold at a 90% loss. The deception was his word investment. It wasn't an investment. It was theft. It was embezzlement, sanitized by the word family. The vile contrast was that he had faced 0 consequences. Aunt Claudia had simply called a meeting and praised his bold, forward-thinking attempt, and I was the one who had to go, hat in hand, to the bank and personally guarantee a high-interest bridge loan to make payroll, using my own small inheritance from my grandfather as collateral. He had lost $100,000. and I was the one who ended up in debt. Just this morning, before the surprise meeting, he and his mother had swanned into my office. Aunt Claudia had looked at my simple, practical dress with open contempt. "Marcus," she'd said, not even looking at me, "has such vision for the family brand. You, Eleanor, are so wonderful with the details." The insult was so practiced, so smooth. I almost didn't feel it. Vision was for the men in suits who lost money. Details were for the women in cardigans who cleaned up the mess. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about the big picture, Ellie," Marcus had said, patting my shoulder. "Just keep those spreadsheets tidy. We're all counting on you." He had smiled, his teeth perfect and white. He was wearing a brand new $5,000 suit. I knew it cost $5,000 because I had processed the expense report. He'd coded it to building maintenance. He had no idea what I'd done. He had no idea what details really meant. He had forgotten, or perhaps never known, about the 1,920 deed. My sacrifice had been 3 straight months. 2 years ago. Living in the county records archive, my aunt was about to sell the family's first property, an old, dilapidated warehouse. For scrap, it's a tax burden, she'd declared. I'd had a hunch. I'd gone to the archive, my eyes burning from the microfilm, my hands black with century-old dust, and I had found it, a single, lost deed from 1920, with a railroad easement clause that was still active. The deception was their narrative. They thought the building was worthless. The vile contrast was that I, the spreadsheet girl, was the only one who had done the real work. I had found the detail that Marcus, the visionary, had missed. That worthless building, with that easement, was worth $8 million to the city's new transit authority. I had single-handedly saved the family from bankruptcy, and at the next board meeting, Marcus had presented my findings as his own. As I was reviewing our long-term assets, he'd said, "I uncovered a fascinating opportunity." I had just sat there, silent, watching him take the credit. That was the pattern. I did the work. He took the credit. I saved. He spent. I remembered. He forgot. And now, here we were. In the emergency meeting he and his mother had called, the meeting where Mr. Rodrino, Henderson, the banker, had just announced the foreclosure, the meeting where my aunt had pointed her finger and publicly executed me. "You have lost our legacy," she was saying, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "You have failed this family. You have failed your grandfather's memory." My grandfather. The man who had taught me to read a ledger. The man who had told me, "Numbers don't lie, Ellie. People do. Trust the numbers." Aunt Claudia stood. "Mr. Henderson, on behalf of the Viridian estate, I am officially terminating Eleanor's position as financial manager. Effective immediately. She has clearly proven herself criminally incompetent. Or perhaps just criminal." She looked at me. "You are a disgrace. Get your things and get out of this house." She had fired me. She had humiliated me. She had blamed me for a crime I didn't commit. And Marcus was just sitting there, his head in his hands, playing the part of the tragic, wounded victim. He was a brilliant performer, but I was a brilliant analyst. And as I stood up, my chair scraping quietly on the wood floor, I looked at his bowed head, and I felt nothing. No anger, no fear, just curiosity. Because I, the detail person, the spreadsheet girl who saw everything, had not seen this. I had not seen a single notice, a single letter, a single word from the bank about this default, which meant the visionary had done something very, very detailed, and I was going to find it. "All right," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I'll get my things." I stood there, mute, as my aunt's words hung in the air, criminally incompetent, or perhaps just criminal. The words were a physical blow, a slap harder than any hand. "Marcus, My cousin, the golden boy, was still hiding his face, his shoulders shaking with what anyone else would have mistaken for grief. But I knew what it was. It was laughter. He was enjoying this. This was the performance of his life. And I was the sacrifice. "Get your things and get out of this house," Aunt Claudia commanded, her voice void of all emotion save for a cold, satisfied finality. She had fired me, in front of the entire family, in front of a stranger from the bank. She had publicly branded me an incompetent, a failure, and a thief. She had erased 5 years of my life, 5 years of my loyal, thankless, agonizing work. In 30 seconds, I turned, my legs feeling like cement, and walked out of the grand dining room. I heard the chairs scrape as the meeting resumed behind me. The sound of my family, my entire family, immediately moving on, discussing damage control and next steps. Not one of them, not a single one, following me to ask if it was true. I was already a ghost. I walked down the hall to my tiny, windowless office, the one they'd given me, the one that used to be a pantry. I sat down at my small, cheap desk, the one I'd bought myself because the estate couldn't afford a new one. Even as Marcus was expensing $5,000 suits, I was supposed to be packing my box, but all I could do was remember. I was back in my Chicago apartment, 5 years ago, the skyline glittering outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. I was 24. I was an analyst at one of the top firms in the country. I had a life. I had a future. And then the call came. "Marcus. Ellie. We need you," he had pleaded, his voice a perfect instrument of practiced vulnerability. "Grandpa's gone. And the books. God. Ellie. They're a disaster. The estate is bleeding money. We're going to lose everything if you don't come home." The sacrifice was my entire bite of cake. Hard-won independence. I had fought my way out of this toxic, suffocating family. I had built a life on my own terms, and they were asking me to come back, to dive back into the very poison I had escaped. The deception was his promise, just for 6 months. "Ellie," he'd sworn, "just to get us straight, to stop the bleeding. You're the only one who understands the numbers. 6 months, and we'll hire a permanent replacement. I promise." 6 months. That was 5 years ago. I had come home, and the 6 months had become a year. The permanent replacement was never hired. Because why hire a professional when you could get a family member for free? My temporary job as the loyal, invisible spreadsheet girl had become my life sentence. The vile contrast was his life versus mine. In the 5 years I had been imprisoned in this pantry, meticulously rebuilding the family's shattered finances, Marcus had lived like a king. My work, my cost-saving, my brilliant financial maneuvering, was the fuel for his vision. He had launched the art gallery, his luxury magazine, the disastrous tech incubator. He was the visionary, the face of the brand, while I was the silent, joyless engine in the basement, buried in the details, making his extravagant, reckless, failed dreams possible. He had not just asked me to come home, he had summoned me, like a servant, to finance his fantasy life with my own. And I, like a fool, had come. I looked at the small, pathetic cardboard box on my desk. I was supposed to put my life in it. My calculator, my accounting textbooks, the small, framed photo of my grandfather. The only person in this family who had ever looked at me and seen something other than a tool. "Numbers don't lie. Ellie," he used to say, his finger tapping the ledger. "People do. Trust the numbers." I had trusted the numbers. I had made them work. I had balanced the unbalanced. I had spent months, 2 years ago, in the dusty, freezing county archive, my fingers bleeding from turning 1,000-page, century-old deed books, looking for the one thing I knew my grandfather had hidden, the 1,920 deed. My sacrifice was my health, my sanity, I had sat in that basement archive until my eyes burned and my back ached, fueled by nothing but cold coffee and a quiet, disparity certainty. The deception was the family narrative. That old warehouse. It's a teardown. Aunt Claudia had insisted. It's a tax burden. Sell it for scrap. The vile contrast was my discovery versus his credit. I had found the deed. I had found the railroad easement clause. I had found the $8 million needle in the haystack that saved this family. That funded Marcus's next 3 ventures. And at the next family meeting, Marcus had stood up, holding my research, my report, and said, as I was reviewing our long-term assets, I uncovered a fascinating opportunity. He had taken the credit. He had looked right at me, his eyes dead and empty. And he had taken the credit for my $8 million save, and I had let him. I had sat there, silent, the good girl, the detail person, and I had let him. The humiliation I felt now was not just for the public firing, it was for my silence, for the 1,000 cuts, the 1,000 public humiliations, the 1,000 times I had let them call me practical and boring while I was the only thing standing between them and total ruin. I was the scapegoat. I had always been the scapegoat. And now, I was the public scapegoat. I had been framed for a crime I didn't commit, for a foreclosure I knew nothing about. My grandfather was right. People lie. The numbers don't. And the numbers? My numbers. My spreadsheets. My ledgers. They didn't show this. I saw every wire transfer. Every check. Every cent that moved in and out of this estate. I would have seen a $20 million loan. I would have seen the default notices. I would have seen something. But I had seen nothing. Which meant this wasn't incompetence. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. My humiliation and confusion congealed into a cold, hard resolve. This was not a failure of my details. This was an act of his vision. I looked around the small, cramped office. My aunt had told me to get my things and get out. This wasn't even my office. It was Marcus's old office. The one he'd used before he'd been promoted to the Grand Corner Suite. I had just taken over his old desk. His old chair. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the heavy, mahogany desk, the one I'd never bothered to fully clean out. It was filled with his old, useless files, brochures for yachts, old restaurant receipts he'd never expensed. I pulled the drawer all the way out, lifting it off its runners to make sure I hadn't left anything of my own behind. And I saw it. It was crumpled into a ball, shoved so far into the back of the desk cavity that it was almost invisible. A single piece of paper, jammed between the back of the drawer and the desk frame. It was a final default notice from the bank. It was dated 6 months ago, and it wasn't addressed to the Viridian estate. It was addressed to Mr. Marcus Viridian. Personal and confidential. I uncrumpled it, my hands shaking. It was a personal loan. A $30 million personal loan for Viridian Modern Ventures. And the collateral he had used, the asset he had personally leveraged to fund his own private, non-estate venture, was the flagship building, our family's crown jewel. A had defaulted 6 months ago. He had known. He had known this was coming. He had hidden it. He had sat in that meeting, his head in his hands, pretending to be a victim. When he was the executioner, he had called this emergency meeting, not to confess, but to frame me. He had orchestrated my public humiliation, my firing, to cover his own catastrophic criminal theft. He had pointed the gun at my head to hide the one in his hand. I looked at the crumpled paper. This detail. He had called me the spreadsheet girl. He had called me good with details. He had no idea. He had no idea what I was capable of. He had no idea what my details, my spreadsheets, my ledgers, they were about to do to him. He thought he had fired me. He thought he had won. He thought I was packing a box. I was, but it wasn't a box of my belongings. It was a box of evidence. I sat on the dusty floor of the pantry, the crumpled bank notice in my hand. It felt cold, like a piece of dead skin. He had known. For 6 months, he had known. He had walked around this house, smiled at me, patted my shoulder, and called me Ellie. All while this time, bomb was strapped to the family. Strapped to me. The emergency meeting. It wasn't an emergency. It was an execution. It was a plan. He had gathered the entire family, the banker, to create a public spectacle, a public witness to his magnificent, gaslit performance of betrayal. He had made them all watch as he, the victim, pointed the finger at me, the scapegoat. My sacrifice was my public humiliation, my firing, the looks of disgust from my aunts and uncles, the shame of being called a criminal in the home I had saved, by the very people I had saved it for. The deception was his head in his hands, his shaking shoulders, his "I trusted you." Ellie, it was all a lie. A cold, practiced, perfect lie. The vile contrast was his performance of grief versus my actual ruin. He was worried about his ventures while I was being thrown out of my home. He had orchestrated this entire, humiliating, theatrical production to cover a single, simple, $30 million crime. I stood up, my knees cracking. The crumpled notice was my only proof of his personal loan. But it wasn't the weapon. The weapon was still on my desk. I walked over to my laptop and opened it. The screen lit up, illuminating my boring spreadsheets, my details, my aunt's voice, so clear in my memory, from just last week. Mocking me at dinner, "Eleanor, you must be so tired of all those little numbers. Marcus is the big picture man, the visionary. Thank God he has you to handle the minutia." The sacrifice was my identity. I had let them brand me. I was the minutia. I was the boring, practical, cardigan-wearing adding machine, the one they tolerated because she could balance a checkbook. The deception was that my work was small. The vile contrast was that my small details were the only thing holding up his big picture. His vision was a hot air balloon of ego and theft, and I was the one on the ground. Frantically, silently, patching the holes. He called me the spreadsheet girl. He had no idea. He thought my spreadsheets were a tool. He didn't realize they were a diary of his every sin. I opened the master ledger, the one I had rebuilt from scratch, the one I had cross-referenced with 5 years of bank statements and invoices. I went to the family development code, the one he used as his personal slush fund, and I began to work. This wasn't packing. This was a forensic audit. I remembered the first big one. 3 years ago. The $100,000 loan for his failed art gallery. It's an investment. Ellie, he'd insisted. It's for the family brand. The sacrifice was my own financial security. When he'd defaulted on the gallery's lease and the creditors came calling, the estate couldn't cover it. I had to take out a high-interest bridge loan, using my small, personal inheritance from my grandfather as collateral. I had put my own, real money on the line to cover his fake venture. The deception was his word, investment. The vile contrast was that he hosted a champagne-soaked closing party for the gallery, calling it a bold experiment. I was the one who spent the next 6 months eating instant noodles to pay the interest on the loan I had taken out to clean up his experiment. I kept scrolling. The details were so much worse than I thought. Here it was. The $5,000 suit he'd worn this morning, coded to building maintenance. A $10,000 research trip to the south of France, coded to agricultural supplies. He hadn't just stolen one big chunk. He had been siphoning. 1,000 here, 5,000 there. A steady, parasitic drain on the estate I was killing myself to keep solvent. The sacrifice was my life. My frugal, small, practical life. I hadn't bought a new coat in 3 years. I drove a 10-year-old car. I had given up my own apartment, my own high-paying career, my own future. And for what the deception was that it was for the family. The vile contrast was that I was sacrificing, I was saving. I was living like a pauper, so he could live like a king. Every bold venture he launched was funded by a personal sacrifice I had made. And then I saw it. The $8 million entry. My one true victory. The 1,920 deed. I looked at the date, and my blood ran cold. The entry for the $8 million sale was dated 2 years ago. The entry for his $30 million personal loan, the one that had just bankrupted the family, was dated 1 month later. He had seen the $8 million windfall that I had generated, and he hadn't seen salvation for the family. He had seen opportunity for himself. He had used that massive, life-saving cash infusion, my work, as proof of the estate's renewed vigor to go to a different bank, a predatory lender, and secure his own massive, secret loan. He had used my greatest success as the collateral for his greatest crime. He hadn't just taken credit for my work. He had weaponized it. He had used my $8 million save to leverage a $30 million theft. That was it. The analysis was over. The time for details was done. Now, it was time for minutia. I did not call my lawyer. I did not call the police. I did not call my aunt. I opened a new file, a blank spreadsheet, and I began to compile. This was not an emotional plea. This was not a defense. This was an invoice. I created a single page. A simple, elegant, 1-page summary. Summary of family development, ventures, Marcus Viridian. 2020到2025. It had 3 columns. Date, venture, amount, and at the bottom, a final. Beautiful. Terrible number. The total amount he had siphoned. Stolen. Or lost. The total amount. Not including the new $30 million loan. I printed 1 copy. I printed a second. I took the crumpled 6-month-old default notice and I flattened it. The wrinkles, a map of his deception. I put the notice and my 1-page summary into a clean manila folder. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. The auction was at 9. They had given me 48 hours to disappear. He thought I was packing a box of sweaters. He thought I was weeping. Defeated. Incompetent. He thought he had fired the spreadsheet girl. He had no idea he had just promoted her. He had promoted me to executor. He had called me the detail person. He was right. He had called me the spreadsheet girl. He was right. He had told me to keep the spreadsheets tidy. I had. He thought he was the big picture man. The visionary. He was about to find out what a detail-oriented visionary could do. He was about to be absorbed by my numbers. He was about to be itemized. He wanted to save the Verdian spirit. I was going to save the estate. But I was going to do it my way. With a single, cold, hard, beautiful, unavoidable detail. The auction was set for 9 a.m. On the steps of the flagship building itself. It was a humiliating, public spectacle, just as Marcus had intended. When I arrived, the entire family was already there, arranged in a tableau of tragic grief. Aunt Claudia was dressed in black, as if for a funeral, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Marcus, in his most expensive suit, was giving a brave interview to a local news reporter. Today, we mourn a failure of management, he said, his voice thick with fake sorrow. A terrible, terrible failure of details. But the Viridian spirit will rebuild. We will. He saw me. He saw me walking up the steps, holding a single manila folder. His eyes narrowed. Just for a second. He was confused. I was not supposed to be here. I was supposed to be gone. A disgraced, weeping, incompetent ghost. I was supposed to be the tragedy. I just stared at him. My face, a perfect, calm, blank slate. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man from the bank, was setting up his podium. All right, folks, he called out, his voice booming. A sad day, but a great opportunity. We are here for the sale of 1,400 Viridian Plaza. He started rattling off the legal description, the lot size. My aunt was now openly sobbing into her handkerchief. A perfect performance. Marcus put his arm around her. The dutiful, suffering son. This is a tragedy, he whispered to the reporter, loud enough for me to hear. A tragedy of incompetence. My cousin, she wasn't up to the task. Do I hear an opening bid? The auctioneer called. We will start the bidding at $10 million. Stop. My voice wasn't a shout. It was a command. It was cold, clear, and absolute. The auctioneer froze, his gavel in midair. The crowd, the reporters, my entire family. They all turned and stared at me. Marcus's face was a perfect picture of concerned confusion. Ellie, what are you doing, please? Don't make this any harder than it is. This auction cannot proceed, I said, walking forward until I was standing directly in front of the podium, in front of the entire family. I turned to Mr. Brustes, Henderson, the banker from the meeting, who was standing by the steps. Mr. Henderson, this auction is based on a fraudulent contract. A collective gasp went through the family. Aunt Claudia stood up, her face crimson. How dare you? After what you've done, you are not only incompetent, you are delusional. Am I? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I opened the manila folder. I took out the crumpled, 6-month-old default notice. Mr. Henderson, I said, this building was foreclosed on due to a defaulted $30 million loan. Is that correct? Yes. Ms. Vale, as we discussed. But what you weren't told, I interrupted, is that this loan was not an estate loan. It was a personal loan, taken out by Marcus Viridian, for his own private, non-estate venture. I held up the crumpled paper. This, I said, is the final default notice, addressed to Marcus Viridian, personal and confidential. It was sent to his office 6 months ago. The office I now occupy. He hid it. He received it. He knew about it. And he hid it for 6 months. All while planning to use me as the scapegoat for his own personal, catastrophic failure. The reporter's camera, which had been on Marcus's grieving face, now swiveled to me, to the paper in my hand. Marcus was no longer performing. He was white. He was sheet white. She's lying, he stammered, his voice suddenly 2 octaves too high. She faked that. She's the one who was fired for incompetence. She's lashing out. Incompetence, I repeated. You're right. I was incompetent. I was incompetent to ever trust you. I turned back to the crowd, to my stunned, silent family. He wants to talk about incompetence. Let's talk about the details. I reached back into my folder and pulled out the second piece of paper. My 1-page summary, the invoice. My aunt and cousin called me the spreadsheet girl, I said, my voice carrying over the stunned silence. They called me the detail person. They were right. He couldn't pay his $30 million personal loan because he's been systematically stealing from the estate for a decade. He called me the spreadsheet girl. He was right. Here are my spreadsheets. I handed the 1-page summary to the reporter. I handed it to Mr. Henderson. I handed it to my Aunt Claudia. Date? I said, my voice a cold, flat metronome. Venture. Amount. 3 years ago, $100,000 for his failed art gallery. A loan I had to personally secure. Using my inheritance. 2 years ago, $5,000 for a suit. Coded to building maintenance. $10,000 for a research trip to France. Coded to agricultural supplies. A steady, parasitic drain. A decade of theft. All hidden under family development. All the vision he was funding. It was with money I was saving. He was a leech. And I was the host. The reporter was staring at the paper, his mouth open. My God, he whispered. It's all itemized. He looked at Marcus. Mr. Viridian, is this true? Did you code a suit to building maintenance? This is proprietary family information, Marcus yelled, lunging for the paper. This is slander. And this, I said, my voice cutting him off, is the real crime. I pointed to the last 2 lines on the summary. 2 years ago, $8 million. The sale of the 1,920 deed. My work, the work I did, the work he took credit for, and 1 month later, his $30 million personal loan. He didn't just steal. He used my greatest success as the collateral for his greatest theft. He used the money I saved to go to a new bank and leverage our entire legacy. And when it all collapsed, he held a public meeting, and he fired me. Aunt Claudia was staring at the spreadsheet. She was staring at the dates. She saw her own loans, her own complicity, her own enabling, all listed in black and white. She looked at her son. She wasn't looking at a visionary. She was looking at a common, pathetic thief. She looked at him with a dawning, unimaginable horror. "Marcus," she whispered, "what did you do?" He had lost her. In that single, detailed moment. He had lost his greatest ally. Total isolation. He had nowhere left to hide. Mr. Henderson, the banker, was on his phone. "Yes. I need estate legal down here. Immediately. The auction is off. We have a case of significant criminal fraud. Poetic justice. Marcus' big picture lies. His vision, his brand, had been utterly, completely, and publicly demolished by my boring, small, incompétent details. He had called me a spreadsheet girl as an insult, and my spreadsheet had just ended his life. The auctioneer was packing his podium. The reporter was now live, his voice buzzing with the scandal. An incredible turn of events here. It appears Marcus Viridian, far from being a victim, is the architect of a massive, multi-million-dollar fraud against his own family. Marcus just stood there, his $5,000 suit looking like a costume. As 2 bank security guards moved to flank him, he was no longer a visionary. He was just a criminal. The epilogue was swift. It was a detail person's specialty. The bank, in an attempt to avoid a massive, public lawsuit, agreed to restructure the entire estate's debt, contingent on one thing: that I, Eleanor, the spreadsheet girl, to be given court-appointed, total, and permanent control of the Viridian estate. My first act as head of the family was to sign the criminal complaint against Marcus. He was facing a dozen charges of fraud and embezzlement. My second act was to liquidate all of his ventures. His art gallery, his magazine, his tech incubator. I sold them all, at a loss, to pay back the real debts he had incurred. Final inversion. I now sit in the grand corner office, the one that used to be his. Aunt Claudia is no longer on the board. She lives in a small condo. Her family name, a local punchline, Marcus, I'm told, is awaiting trial. He has no assets, no vision, no brand. I am, finally, the big picture person, because I was the only one who ever understood that the big picture is just a mosaic of a million tiny, crucial details. They thought my obsession with numbers was my weakness. They were wrong. It was my weapon. They tried to make me the scapegoat. But they forgot one thing. The scapegoat is the one who knows where all the bodies are buried. And I was the only one who had kept the receipts. Have you ever been underestimated? Only to use your unique skills to turn the tables. I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that the details are everything. Remember, the quiet ones, the spreadsheet people, are the ones who are really keeping score.